I welcome all of you to this today's program, and it's an honor and privilege also to welcoming all the august audiences, so senior clinicians of SMS Medical College and in other parts of the city also. And on behalf of Mahatma Gandhi, apart from your, in spite of the busy schedule and COVID pandemic also, you have taken time to attend this session. For that, on behalf of management of Mahatma Gandhi Health University, I really thankful to all of you. Secondly, Mahatma Gandhi Health University have just now completed 21 years of in the state of Rajasthan. The man who created he himself is there here, Dr. M.L. Sonkar Sahab. I request all of you to give him a big round of applause for M.L. Sonkar Sahab and from this year. And secondly, the man who actually drives this COVID drive, because he is the leader behind our entire university. Because of him, entire 10,000 people have worked under last 1.5 years in the COVID pandemic, and we have treated more than 1 lakh IP patient and more than 2.5 lakhs OP basis, and we have done more than nearly 4 lakhs COVID test, including 50,000 for the international passengers at the Jaipur International Airport. So he is the man. So please, I request, my humble request, please stand at your पहले से खड़ा होके एक बार हमारे चेयरमैन साहब के लिए एक बार जोरदार तालियां हमारी सर प्लीज. And because we are 30 minutes late, so may I request the surgeon par excellence, one of our renowned surgeons. He needs no introduction. He is the having the magical hands. So I request Dr. Ajay Sharma sir. He is the professor head of the surgical gastroenterology. Please start the session. I request, please sir, come to the dais. Big round of applause for Dr. Ajay Sharma sir, please.
Thanks, Sukant, for introducing me with such beautiful words. On behalf of Mahatma Gandhi Medical College University, I thank you all to spare this time for an important event, which is definitely a milestone for Rajasthan. We have some of the stalwarts in their fields who have joined with us in this institute. It will be really an honor for all of us to listen to them, what their views on their subject, as well as we have an opportunity to discuss with them. Before I ask them to come on the dais, I'd like to just give a brief introduction of Mahatma Gandhi Medical College. Mahatma Gandhi Medical College was started in the year 2000. We got the first batch of MBBS in the year 2001 with 100 seats. We have here with us a chairperson at that time, now he's an emeritus chairperson, Dr. M.L. Swankar sir. It was very difficult to understand. हम उस समय MS कर रहे थे और राजस्थान में एक प्राइवेट मेडिकल कॉलेज की कल्पना आना हमारे लिए बहुत ही ज़्यादा अचंभित करने वाली बात थी. इतना दूरदर्शी होकर सोचना कि हमारे यहाँ पर एक ऐसा मेडिकल कॉलेज चलेगा और फूलेगा जिसका कि हिंदुस्तान भर में नाम होगा. That was the vision when no one of us could think of. He was doing very good in his infertility branch, but to get up into this objective other than his primary care of his branch was a thing which has given a new dimension to Rajasthan. To most of the surprises which I'll be telling you now in terms of Mahatma Gandhi Medical College, we had our first post-graduation seat started in 2008, MD and MS. You'll be surprised, we have more than 15 branches in which we are giving this specialization. First super specialization seat MCH and DM in Rajasthan in private sector was started in 2016 at Mahatma Gandhi Medical College. And for our branch, our department, GI surgery, which I know, it was in 2020, we are the first center in the Rajasthan to start a MCH surgical gastroenterology seat in the state of Rajasthan. We have other specializations in the part of the institute, which are, we have a dental college, we have a nursing college, we have a hospital administration, and the other allied branches as well. We have a very specified molecular and genetic labs. It was to my surprise, which I came to know, I think senior people can add to it, that we have more number of PG seats than the UG seats today. Can you imagine number of PG seats? We have presently 150 seats, which are already, we have already got an inspection for 250 seats, but our PG seats are more than 150 at present day, which was really a surprise for me. I think it must be a surprise for most of my colleagues who are sitting over here. That is really a vision for future and the coming years. We have not only our MCH program, but we have many fellowship programs also running in our institute for the people who don't get into their MCH program or who are in service, who are already practicing elsewhere, can come to our institute and avail their fellowship programs in their specializations. Can you imagine, we have treated till date 1.6 crore patients in Mahatma Gandhi Medical College. From beginning till date, it's a huge number, which I was really surprised, and it's very, very good that we have achieved such a big number. We have approximately 10,000 people visiting every day to our institute. Yes, definitely, SMS is a premier institute, and it was started in the year before, 47. We started in the year 2000, but still getting up to 10,000 is really a remarkable achievement, which I would like to give. I will request all to give a big round of applause to Mahatma Gandhi Medical College Institute. With that, I would request now our emeritus chairperson to please come on the dais and please take a seat, to be welcomed by Dr. M.L. Swarnkar sir. Please give a round of applause to Dr. M.L. Swarnkar sir, the founder of Mahatma Gandhi Medical College. Professor Dr. Hemant Malhotra. I request sir to please take a seat on dais. Dr. Saraswat, V.A. Saraswat sir, to please come on and take a seat. Professor Dr. Vinay Kapoor, Dr. Vinay Kapoor sir. And in all this, I should not miss the two great people who have contributed a lot to our institute. One, Dr. Subhash Nepalia, who has been the seed to develop GI sciences when we all did not know that it will come into. Sir, please, Dr. Nepalia, sir. And one of the renowned figures of Rajasthan in medical practice, whom we all know in name of Dr. G.N. Saxena, who has been the principal of our medical college. I request him also to please come on the stage. G.N. Saxena sir को हम GNS नाम से जाना करते थे, and he has been a big contribution in developing the institute. I request Colonel Chaube sir to please come and give a moment to bouquet to Dr. M.L. Swarnkar sir. Colonel Chaube sir. Dr. Colonel Chaube sir is a professor, emeritus professor in surgical gastroenterology, still having a blessing with us in developing our department. It is because of his efforts and his blessings that we could start our program. So I would request Dr. Colonel Chaube sir, please present a bouquet to Dr. M.L. Swarnkar sir. Now I request doc, now I request Dr. J.M. Mehta sir. I think most of our colleagues, teachers, seniors know him. He has been the founder of GI surgery in Rajasthan. I request him to present a bouquet to Dr. Hemant Malhotra sir. I request Dr. Shashi Panikar sir. Dr. Shashi Panikar, he is a senior physician, to please present a bouquet to Dr. V.A. Saraswat sir. Dr. Vikas Anand Saraswat sir. I saw Dr. Mukesh Kalla joining in somewhere. Can I? Oh yes. So yeah, we have another person who has been doing a lot of work in gastroenterology, and so from his hands, I would like a bouquet to be gifted to Dr. V.K. Kapoor sir. We have we have Dr. Monica. Dr. Monica, please come on the dais. I request you to please present a bouquet to Dr. Nepalia sir. Rajat Bhargav, who has been one of the stones for development of our department in the institute, who has been doing all the hard work when I think none of us joined along with Dr. Subhash Nepalia to develop the branch in our institute. I request him to please give a bouquet to Dr. G.N. Saxena sir. So now, before we take the session ahead, I request a few words by our Emeritus Chairperson, Sir, Dr. M.L. Swanka, Sir, to please throw light on the how we are thinking about the department, vision, and future. Please, Dr. Swanka.
Good evening, friends. Today it is a great opportunity that we all, those who are related with the gastroenterology, whether it is medical or surgical or liver transplant, are having a get together. And first of all, I like to welcome Dr. Vivek Saraswatji, who has recently joined us as a head of the hepatology in Mahatma and liver transplant in Mahatma Gandhi Medical College and Hospital, our university. So I welcome you, sir. He is a known figure in his field all over nation, rather internationally he is known to everybody. Another legendary person who is sitting here, who is heading our pancreatic biliary surgery and surgical this liver transplant is Dr. V.K. Kapoor, sir. Another very prominent figure in the surgical gastroenterology and hepatology, surgical hepatology. Then, of course, my friend Dr. Subhash Nepalia, Dr. Ganesh Narayanji Saxena, our former principal, now Pro-Vice Chancellor, and my very dear friend Dr. Hemant Malhotra, and I give all the credit, most of the credit rather, to him for developing the cancer center like so fast, like even I could not imagine that the building is getting shorter. So it is a 12-story or 11-story, 12-story building, but it started getting congested. So as you are seeing, it is already written Center for Digestive Sciences. So we are coming up with the Center for Digestive Sciences, mainly liver transplant, and another 12-story building which will facilitate majority of the GI medicine and GI surgeries, including liver transplant, should be there within next 1.5 to 2 years, and hope the center does very well. We have already adopted Mukhyamantri Chiranjeevi Yojana, and we are giving full-fledged support to the government to treat our poor and needy patients free of cost, because the government is paying for us. And fortunately now we are getting reimbursement also from the government, so that is a good thing. And we are right and left going to help the people of state of Rajasthan to get the treatment. Aapka swasth, aapka adhikar, that is the philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi Medical College and Hospital also. Fortunately, as told by Dr. Ajay Sharma, who is heading surgical gastroenterology, now we have almost majority of the branches super specialty in oncology and GI. We have DM medical oncology, MCH surgical gastroenterology, MCH surgical oncology, and then MD radiation oncology, MD nuclear medicine, and hope likely to get MCH hepatopancreatic surgery this year. And any other branch which is left, almost we are completing or going to have in next 1 or 2 years. We are also working on immunotherapy, dendritic cell therapy in our institute, which is already in very advanced stage to develop dendritic cell therapy, stem cell therapy, or immunotherapy to treat the advanced stage patients with the help of immunotherapy, in-house production of these sort of vaccines against these cancers. So we are coming up with all these things, and with the blessings of Dr. V.K. Kapoor and Dr. Vivek Saraswatji sitting here, I hope that institute will grow day by day as best as possible. We have Dr. Shashwat Sareen also with us, who is exclusively trained in liver transplant at ILBS, and then later in Turkey for almost more than 1 year. So he is dedicated, and you will see his surgery is a wonderful surgeon. So kindly extend support to all of our team who is working, and we assure you to give our best services, best economical, best services, ethical services at Mahatma Gandhi Hospital. With these words, I thank you very much that you have spared so much time, and you have given me the honor to be here with you. This is nothing, I have done nothing, it is just God's grace. राम कृपा कर चित में यही, जिस पर भगवान की कृपा होती है तो सारे काम अच्छे हो जाते हैं, अच्छे होते रहते हैं, हमारे इंटेंशंस अच्छे हैं, ईश्वर की कृपा है, इससे ये संस्थान आगे बढ़ रहा है, और मुझे लगता है कि आप सब लोगों का आशीर्वाद इसमें रहेगा, आगे बढ़ेगा. थैंक यू वेरी मच.
Thanks, sir. It was a really very beautiful and a brief introduction of the institute and the vision for the future. We actually planned, me and Dr. Kapoor were sitting long time back when Dr. Kapoor had joined, and we planned a CME that we should start, and unfortunately at that time it was COVID. And post-COVID, now this is the first time that we were waiting to have a good get-together, and Dr. Kapoor told Dr. Saraswat is about to join, हम लोग दोनों एक साथ introduce होंगे. That will be a better way. And so we waited for this all this time to get this opportunity when both Dr. Kapoor and Dr. Saraswat are with us here on the same platform, and they have joined now with us in the department and with a future vision, a long vision for our institute. Topic हम लोग सोच रहे थे what should be the topic, क्या बोला जाए, क्या रखा जाए. तो हमने कहा सर देखिए गैस्ट्रोएंट्रोलॉजी या हेपेटोलॉजी एंड गैस्ट्रो सर्जरी में जब तक ऑन्कोलॉजिस्ट इंक्लूड नहीं होगा ना तो मज़ा नहीं आएगा. एंड सिंस वी वर लकी दैट वी हैड a senior person like Dr. Hemant Malhotra with us, who is an excellent speaker, so we could get that topic and something related on all the three topics, that oncology, gastroenterology and surgery at the same platform. So intention today is, since we have all the senior members in the audience, that you are welcome for a vast majority of questions which should be more interactive for everybody. So with that, I think we would like to start with Professor Dr. Hemant Malhotra. Dr. Hemant Malhotra sir was the head of the department in medical oncology at SMS Medical College. And after his vast experience of starting bone marrow and starting oncology department and starting a good program in SMS, we were fortunate that he's here with us at Mahatma Gandhi Medical College. And so I would request now Dr. Sir to please come and deliver his session today on GI cancer. So the topic allocated to him was pancreas. So let us see his objectives, and then subsequently we have all the audience to ask the questions on GI, on pancreatic cancers, and he will give his oncological opinion. So we can start with Dr. Hemant Malhotra, sir. Can we request that, yes, sir, it will be easy for you to come on the seat in front. Can we have a rearrangement of the seats so that the vision is clear? One of the boys can come and just arrange the seats. In the meantime, let me take this opportunity to introduce to our team here. We have in surgical gastroenterology and HPB surgery, Anand. Anand, can you just get up? Anand is an associate professor with us here in our department. Shashwat is an assistant professor with us, Shashwat Sareen. And where is Vinay? Vinay, can you just stand up? Yeah, Vinay is an assistant professor with us here. And we have 2 seats of GI surgery. Molinal Krishna, without you, without the hard work, these are the 2 boys who have joined with us in MCH students with us, first batch of surgical gastroenterology in Rajasthan. And in medical gastroenterology, you all know Dr. Nepalia, you have just seen Rajat. Rajat, please get up. Yeah, Rajat is here with us. He is doing a lot of hard work in establishing the department. Akash, yes, Akash Rajender, he is a DM in gastroenterology. He is with us in medical gastroenterology. And where is our young Karan? I can't see Karan. Karan is left. He doesn't even take beer. कहाँ चला गया? अच्छा, तो Karan सीधे खड़ा. So Karan is a person who is a hepatologist. He has done his DM in hepatology. He is the first person in Rajasthan with DM hepatology to join with us, and so it's a pleasure for us that he is with us now for hepatology. We have our intervention radiologist Nikhil. Nikhil is an intervention radiologist who takes care of all of our patients for liver transplant as well as for our GI sciences. We have a very extraordinarily good team of anesthesia. I think Ganesh can come, Ganesh and Gaurav and Vipin, please. So, pardon sir? Yes, I forgot. Nikhil needs a big round of applause. He has got the first intervention radiology DM in Rajasthan. So I think with 2 seats. So the Nikhil has got that, and our anesthesia team, they have been taking care of all our patients in transplant as well as in GI surgery, pre-operative, intraoperative, post-operative. We are comfortable only operating. So we have a good pre-op and post-op team with that. So thank you all. Thanks for the great team. And to have this team here, I think we should thank our administration and especially Swarnka sir as well as Vikas ji and Sachdeva sir. Sachdeva sir is not here, but he has been very supportive for developing the department in our institute. I am just utilizing the time so that the chairs go away. So that now I hand over the mic to Dr. Hemant Malhotra sir. It's really a pleasure to listen to the good speakers today, all the 3 of them. So with Dr. Hemant Malhotra sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ajay. My pleasure and privilege to be here. I'm going to speak to you very briefly about pancreatic cancer, just give you an overview. We have conferences of pancreatic cancer which last for 5 days. So obviously, you would prefer dinner rather than 5 days of lecture. So here goes my greetings to all of you from the Mahatma Gandhi Medical College Hospital and the Shri Ram Cancer Center. And this is our oncology team. This is the full team, surgical oncology, radiation oncology. Nikhil, you can see in this group, nuclear medicine experts are here. really truly comprehensive team, and I'm proud to say that this is one of the largest teams without doubt in Rajasthan, and possibly one of the largest teams in the whole country. And this is my medical oncology team, and I have no hesitation in saying कि मेरी पूरी टीम जो है वो मेरे से at least 1.5 times better है, each one of them is handpicked. And I think I have Ajay Yadav here. Ajay, can you just stand up and acknowledge? Thank you very much. So, like, really truly wonderful team, and Dr. Swarnkar Senior and Dr. Swarnkar Vikas, they've given, I've been lucky enough to have a completely free hand, and if somehow we don't do good, then it is entirely because of me and not because of my team. So let's come to the topic. I have to finish in 10 minutes. It is pancreatic cancer. We are talking about adenocarcinoma of the pancreas, 13th most common cancer world over, but it is the 7th most common cause of cancer mortality. And you see that over a period of time, 2010 to 2020, most of the cancers, lung, breast, their mortality has been decreasing, but the mortality of pancreatic cancer has been steadily increasing, and we are anticipating that by 2030 this will continue to increase. So we really truly need to sit down, all of us, in a multidisciplinary way and find ways and means to diagnose the disease early and to take care of it in a comprehensive way so that we can impact on this mortality. By and large, the disease is divided into localized, which forms about only 1/5 of the patient, regional, in which that spread to the regional lymph nodes. This is about 1/3 of the patient, and unfortunately, more than 50% at diagnosis are stage 4 disease or metastatic disease. And for these patients, the 5-year survival is an extremely dismal 5%. Even for the patients who are diagnosed with localized disease, only 1/3 of them are alive at 5 years. So really, a lot needs to be done for this malignancy. So despite the full efforts of Dr. Kapoor and his team, Ajay and his team, we still are able to provide a prolonged survival in a minority of patients. So when we have a patient who is recently diagnosed, this is the categorization which we make. Resectable, no questions asked. Dr. Kapoor, Dr. Ajay, they take over. Then we have a borderline resectable category in which the disease is, difficult to operate. Getting an R0 resection or a microscopically negative disease after surgical resection is difficult. And now this has been recognized as a distinct entity, and our role is coming up in this. We give these patients neoadjuvant chemotherapy, sometimes neoadjuvant radiotherapy, and make them more operable for our surgical colleagues so that we increase the likelihood of R0 resection. And then thirdly, you have the unresectable patients who are locally advanced or metastatic. And this is, pretty clearly defined criterias by which you assess resectability. And here the role of the radiodiagnosis, the role of the interventional radiologists, all those people come in so that they can accurately tell us this is an operable patient, this is a borderline patient, this is an inoperable patient, and then we decide the strategy. And this is the strategy which we decide when we talk of systemic treatment. We treat with either curative intent or we treat with palliative intent. For a patient who comes with stage 4 disease, our goal right up front is that we have to control this disease, we cannot cure this disease. Then the nature of the systemic treatment, it could be chemotherapy, targeted therapy, immunotherapy, or it could be local treatment, which could take the form of surgery and or radiation treatment. And what are the types of systemic therapy? Neoadjuvant treatment, which is given before the local treatment. So this, as I said, is to make the tumor more resectable so that we increase the chances of R0 resection. This modality, neoadjuvant chemotherapy, also takes care of the micrometastasis present at diagnosis. It improves the general condition of the patient, and it also provides an in vivo chemosensitivity testing for us. If I'm using drug A and B in the neoadjuvant setting, After surgery, if I find that there is not enough necrosis in the tumor, then I'm not going to use drug A and B in the adjuvant setting. I will use drug C and D. Then we have something known as adjuvant treatment, in which after the surgeon or the radiation treatment is finished, the local treatment is finished, we feel that this is a big disease, large disease, there might be micrometastasis, and we take care of these micrometastasis by adjuvant therapy. And then sometimes in some patients, we also think of maintenance treatment. So locally advanced disease where a multidisciplinary approach is very, very vital, integrated approach between pathologists, between radiologists, between interventional radiologists, between surgeons, between radiation oncologists and medical oncologists. And then, you have these regimes for the patient who is in good condition. You can use FOLFIRINOX or modified FOLFIRINOX, or a combination of gemcitabine, albumin-bound paclitaxel. For the patient who has poor general condition, performance status is not very good, you could think of capecitabine or you could think of gemcitabine. And these are the important factors which we consider in deciding the treatment: the patient's performance status, the patient's age, comorbidities which the patient has, the risk of endobiliary stent complications. Many of these patients present with obstructive jaundice, and that is where the role of Dr. Saraswat and his team comes in. They stent the patient for us, they reduce the jaundice, improve the liver functions, and then we are able to give chemotherapy to these patients. And then, of course, it is the patient preference and convenience, and there are certain biomarkers which I'll very briefly touch upon at the end of my talk. So by and large, if it's less than 75-year-old fit patient with good performance status, we give them the most aggressive chemotherapy. If the performance status is not so good, then we give them combination chemotherapy but less aggressive. And if the performance status is not good, if the performance status is 3 or 4, then we shift them over to palliative care. If the patient is old, then we do not prefer aggressive chemotherapy. We do give, for the good performance status patients, a combination chemotherapy, but the lighter one. And for the patients who don't have a good performance status, then they straight away go to palliative care. I'm also very happy to tell you, I think our chairman missed out that we have 2 seats in palliative medicine, 2 seats in MD palliative medicine this year at our institution, and we are very, very proud of that. And we will have this a nucleus of highly trained physicians and committed physicians who will dedicate their life to palliative care, which is a very, very vital care of every field of medicine. So just a quick snapshot of some of the regimes which we use. The M-FOLFIRINOX and the gemcitabine nab-paclitaxel, they have been compared head-to-head in this trial, published in 2021. The 2-year survivals are about the same for both the studies. And just to give you a snapshot, that sometimes for the right patient, in the neoadjuvant setting, before local treatment, we are also starting to think of adding radiotherapy. And if you add radiotherapy, then the R0 resection rate increases from 40% to 70%, and that is statistically significant. And there is also a significant reduction in locoregional failure rates. So for the very selected patients, in addition to only chemotherapy, we are now giving them some chemotherapy and then some chemoradiotherapy also. What about adjuvant chemotherapy in pancreatic settings? For the high-risk patient, which Dr. Kapoor, Dr. Ajay have operated, and they are 1 or 2 lymph nodes positive, or it is an R1 resection, there is some microscopic disease left behind. All these patients are given adjuvant therapy. Our 2 choice of regimes are modified FOLFIRINOX and the combination of gemcitabine and capecitabine. And this was the phase 3 study which convinced us that a combination of gemcitabine, capecitabine, the blue bars, is a little better than gemcitabine alone, and a large number of patients, 700 plus patients. So this is studies like this which change our practice. And then after this study, we moved from single agent gemcitabine to a combination of gem-cape. Similarly, for resected patients, like earlier, all the patients used to receive gemcitabine. Then we had this very nice phase 3 randomized study comparing the aggressive chemotherapy with single agent gemcitabine. And you can see for yourself the difference between the disease-free survival and also the overall survival, statistically significant. And now for the right patient, we give them modified FOLFIRINOX, and we try to avoid single agent gemcitabine. Similarly, another randomized phase 3 study of nab-paclitaxel plus gemcitabine compared to gemcitabine alone, equi-efficacious, the nab-paclitaxel gemcitabine slightly more efficacious. So again, this has become one of our standard regimes. And there are several other trials which are on in the adjuvant setting, and we're waiting for the results of these trials. Metastatic pancreatic cancer, more than 50% of the patients come to us like this. We have, again, level 1 evidence that a combination of FOLFIRINOX is better than gemcitabine, both in terms of overall survival, progression-free survival, and this is the regimen of choice now for us for the fit patient. Little more toxicity, but if you choose your patient well, then you can give this regime. The other regime which we most commonly give, gemcitabine nab-paclitaxel, again is better than gemcitabine, and this is the data for you here, both in terms of overall survival, progression-free survival, and this is our regime of choice for the not so fit patient. This is much easier to tolerate than FOLFIRINOX. So here are the results of this study, and I've already told you the snapshot of the results. So these are our two frontline regimes, FOLFIRINOX and nab-paclitaxel gem, and here they are compared head to head. The overall response rate with the more toxic FOLFIRINOX is 32 as compared to 23 with nab-paclitaxel gem. Disease control rate is 70% versus 50%. PFS is 6 months versus 5 months. So a little bit benefit to this, but it is more toxic. So you need to very carefully assess if the patient will be able to tolerate this or not. Some agents we are using in the maintenance setting. Olaparib is a PARP inhibitor which has been available very recently. We continue some chemotherapies again in the maintenance setting, including single agent oral capecitabine, and all these things are pretty much established. One more thing which is important is that for all patients of pancreatic cancer, we are now doing germline and somatic testing for certain genetic mutations. And if you have any one of these mutations, if you have microsatellite instability, then these patients respond very well to immunotherapy. If the patient has a BRCA1 mutation, all of you must have heard of BRCA1 mutation, then these patients are very sensitive to platinums and also to the PARP inhibitors. And if the patient has NTRK fusion, then we have specific targeted NTRK inhibitors now available. And these are the various genetic abnormalities which we can pick up. The incidence is about 10%, so it is advocated that all patients should have testing for these. Just a quick snapshot that this is the use of platinum in patients who have homologous repair deficient genes mutated. And again, you can see the blue bars are with platinum-based therapies, and the red curves are with non-platinum therapies. And you can see the difference between overall survival and progression-free survival. Similarly, the use of PARP inhibitor, olaparib, in patients who have the BRCA mutation, almost all patients have a significant response if you add olaparib to your standard chemotherapy with gemcitabine and cisplatin. So this is again a major advance which has happened in pancreatic cancer. In the maintenance setting, the PARP inhibitors again have come in. This is the trial of olaparib, a PARP inhibitor, as compared to placebo in the maintenance setting. And you can see a very significant difference in the median progression-free survival. So this is the algorithm which we now use for treatment of pancreatic cancer. And if the disease is resectable, the patient goes straight to surgery. Post-pathological staging, we may think of adjuvant chemotherapy. If the patient is borderline resectable, then the surgeon, the gastrosurgeon, the oncosurgeon sends the patient to us. we plan some neoadjuvant chemotherapy, and then we send the patient back to the surgeon for surgery. If the patient has locally advanced or metastatic disease, then palliative chemotherapy is planned. If the patient has poor performance status, then we plan only best supportive care for those patients. So this is the novel agents which are being developed in pancreatic cancer: immunotherapy, stromal depleting agents, molecular targeted therapy. And I'm absolutely sure in my mind that in 5 or 10 years' time, the dismal outlook of this malignancy will change. So my last two concluding slides: there is now an emerging role of neoadjuvant chemotherapy. In some patients, radiotherapy in borderline resectable tumors. There is an emerging role of chemotherapy in the adjuvant setting. The choice of treatment depends on the age of the patient, the general condition, and the associated comorbidities. Frontline FOLFIRINOX or a combination of GEM, nab-pacli has demonstrated benefit in phase 3 studies. And there is a survival benefit following gemcitabine therapy with liposomal irinotecan. This again is an exciting development. Maintenance therapy with PARP inhibitors is something on the horizon for patients who have the BRCA1 mutated disease. And all patients with pancreatic cancer should be tested for germline and somatic mutations. You might pick up one of these mutations and that might change the outlook of the patient big time. Several novel agents, including immunotherapies, molecular and metabolic targeted agents, are under active investigation, and we are really excited about the future in this disease also. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much for this opportunity and for listening to me. And I close my presentation now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hemant Malhotra sir, for a very nice and a brief description about the chemotherapy with for carcinoma pancreas. It is definitely difficult topic to discuss and needs a full day discussion on the same topic. Can I have that video? Actually, I missed with Dr. Hemant Malhotra sir, the video of introduction. Oh, so I need to do it from this place. Okay. For those who don't know that actually we are having this a live demonstration all over the country of the same session which we have. Actually, COVID has taught us so many things, and one of them is a online presentation which we have. So for those who are in surgical gastroenterology Rajasthan, we all know that we now have a Jaipur Surgical Tutorial Group. Jaipur Surgical Tutorial Group has become very famous all over the country, and we have more than 300 participants in it. We have every Saturday we have a class from 9 to 10, which will be a case presentation by the final year students of MCS students all over the country. And this was started by Dr. Kapoor. And so we are thankful that he has given Jaipur a label with this extra teaching facility for all the students all over the country. He is our next speaker today, Dr. Vinay Kapoor sir, and he was my guide when I did my MCS from Sanjay Gandhi PCI. He is presently the professor and head in the Department of Hepatobiliary Surgery. He did his MBBS from All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. Formerly, he is professor and head of the department at Surgical Gastroenterology at Sanjay Gandhi PGI, and formerly he was a visiting professor of King's College Hospital, London, UK, and Interventional Medical University, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, consultant surgeon, and he has lots of publications in his name. His biggest area where we know are three specializations in which we know him is: one is a carcinoma gallbladder. He has lots of publication. We have done a lot of research work in that. In bile duct injuries, I will come to that. Can I have it escape, please, for a minute? And then we have, इसको reduce कर देना, कहाँ से करना? And then he has a lot of work on bile duct injuries. I think we are very proud that we had, stop कर देना. We have a very good person who would teach us bile duct injuries, how to handle them. And his area of interest is a safe laparoscopic cholecystectomy. He wants, even today he dreams, Rajasthan to be free of laparoscopic bile duct injury. When I was a student, I remember him giving a term which I still use. Most of these people are biliary cripples. Fit, young female undergoing a lap chole, having a bile duct injury, loses few months of her life in a very disabled manner. So I think he has been putting all his efforts to teach all over the country about safe lap chole. But today's topic given to him is carcinoma gallbladder, his area of interest and area of expertise. We'll take, so please Dr. Kapoor sir, please come. Dr. Kapoor sir has been my guide and now again my teacher here. We'll have the questions at the end, and I would request topics in relating to, sir has already spoken on carcinoma pancreas. I don't want surgeons to be behind on that aspect. You have full viable of questions on the surgical aspect, gastroenterological aspect, and definitely oncology aspect. Same thing for carcinoma gallbladder. Dr. Vinay Kapoor sir, please.
बच्चे चाहे जितने भी बड़े हो जाएं उनको डांटा जा सकता है, तो अजय को मैं सबके सामने डांट सकता हूं. अजय पास्ट में रहता है. ही वॉज माई स्टूडेंट. टुडे ही इज अ वेरी एबल, वेरी कॉम्पिटेंट colleague. He is the head of the Department of Surgical Gastroenterology at Mahatma Gandhi Medical College and Hospital, and I am very proud of that. It is really very fortunate, not only for my institution, Mahatma Gandhi Medical College and Hospital, but for the city of Jaipur and the state of Rajasthan, that a hepatologist of not only national but international eminence, Dr. Saraswat, has joined us very recently. And I think this is going to be a big boost to the gastroenterology services and sciences, not only in our institution, but in the state. And I formally welcome Dr. Saraswat to the family. So the topic assigned to me today by Ajay is gallbladder cancer, a topic which is of importance because in North India, gallbladder cancer is the commonest non-gender organ related cancer in women. The only three other cancers which are more common than gallbladder cancer in North Indian women are breast, cervix and ovary. Unfortunately for us and fortunately for them, in the Western world, gallbladder cancer is a very uncommon or even rare cancer. When I talk to surgical colleagues in the West, they say, yes, I saw a case few months ago or last year. And that is why not much work has been done on gallbladder cancer. But for us, at least in North India, it is a cancer of importance, and ICMR also has recognized gallbladder cancer as one of the important cancers, at least for our North Indian people. Surprisingly, gallbladder cancer is common in the Native American Indian population also. So in the US, in the white population, in blacks, and it is not a common cancer, but in the Native American Indian population, it is a very common cancer. So that is why almost 2 decades ago, along with this colleague with whom I did Commonwealth Fellowship in the UK, who was a very prominent epidemiologist, we decided to call gallbladder cancer an Indian disease, whether it is Asian Indians or Native American Indians. So during my 3-decade stay at SGPGI, we had a huge experience with gallbladder cancer, and this probably is world's largest or one of the largest single institution experiences. We operated on more than 1,000 patients, including 700 resections, and I'm sure many more went to Dr. Saraswat and his team for palliation because they were not even candidates for surgery. So that is the kind of magnitude of patients. And in Lucknow, other than SGPGI, there is, like SMS, there is a government medical college, KGMC, which probably sees even more patients than us. So this gave us a lot of clinical experience on gallbladder cancer. And along with my colleagues in various other departments, including basic sciences, over the last 3 decades, we could generate some evidence about gallbladder cancer, which is now internationally accepted and recognized. The first thing is nomenclature. There is a lot of confusion about what to call a gallbladder cancer which is diagnosed at various times. And we have been telling people who are interested in gallbladder cancer that all of us should use the standard terminology. And the one term which at least the gastroenterology audience here, which is very confusing, is incidental gallbladder cancer. A lot of people include various other stages of diagnosis as incidental gallbladder cancer, but we have been saying that a true incidental gallbladder cancer is where clinically imaging and even the gross examination of the gallbladder specimen by the surgeon, there is no suspicion of malignancy. So till that stage you think it is just gallstone and chronic cholecystitis. It is only when the pathologist detects a malignancy that it should really be called incidental gallbladder cancer, and gradually more and more groups are accepting this definition. Unfortunately, a patient who presents with clinical symptoms and signs of gallbladder cancer invariably has advanced disease. And therefore, we always tell our young colleagues, and especially the students, that if clinically you think this is gallbladder cancer, examine the patient very carefully to look for distant metastasis, either in the neck or at the umbilicus or free fluid or on perrectal or pervaginal examination. Because if at any one of these places there is clinical evidence of metastatic disease, this patient, unfortunately, you cannot help by any surgical method. You just confirm the metastasis and then maybe give either definitive chemotherapy or just palliative care to these patients. Obviously, since these patients present with biliary symptoms, the first investigation is ultrasound. But then we request our radiology colleagues that you should do a targeted ultrasound, especially in North India. Unfortunately, what many radiologists do is once a stone is found, they stop at that. But that is not enough. You should do a good ultrasound examination like our colleague Dr. Nikhil does, that in North India, if a radiologist sees gallstones, he or she must look at the gallbladder wall and try to find out if the gallbladder wall is thickened, because that becomes the first suspicion of gallbladder cancer. And of course, if it is an obvious case of gallbladder cancer, either clinically or on ultrasound, then he or she must look again for any evidence of metastasis, because if it is there, then probably we do not need any further investigation. If ultrasound doesn't show metastasis, then all patients with either clinically obvious or suspected gallbladder cancer must have a good quality triple phase contrast enhanced CT. Unfortunately, we see patients coming with a poor quality CT and then it doesn't give us much information and we have to repeat a proper CT. And on the CT, again, the radiologist as well as the surgeon must very diligently look for any evidence of metastasis in the liver, in the peritoneum, in the omentum, in the distant nodes. Because if these metastases are there and we can prove them by a fine needle aspiration cytology, then resectional surgery is out of question. The para-aortic nodes can also be targeted by endoscopic ultrasound, because once the ultrasound probe reaches the third part of duodenum, these nodes are lying just behind that and can easily be targeted by FNAC. If CT shows that there is no metastasis and it is a resectable disease, then there is now emerging evidence that PET scan should be done. Because gallbladder cancer is a very aggressive biological malignancy. And PET scan will tell us whether there is distant intra-abdominal, which could not be picked up on CT, or extra-abdominal disease, which again contraindicates resection. So if availability and cost is not a constraint, then more and more groups now believe that all patients with resectable gallbladder cancer on CT before they go for surgery should probably have a PET scan. A very frequent question which is often asked by students is that should I get a tissue diagnosis by fine needle aspiration cytology? The answer is no. If the disease is resectable on CT scan, then there is no need, and in fact it is contraindicated to try to get a tissue diagnosis, because even if the tissue diagnosis is negative, which it can be in a significant number of cases, we will still resect. And there is a definite, though theoretical, risk of dissemination because it's a very aggressive malignancy. So there is no need to do tissue diagnosis if the disease is potentially technically resectable. On CT scan, if the vessels in the hepatoduodenal ligament, that means the proper hepatic artery and the main portal vein are involved, if pancreas and to some extent duodenum is involved, that's a debatable issue, and if distant nodes are positive, then this is unresectable gallbladder cancer. We may resect it, but the outcome is going to be poor. So resectable gallbladder cancer is the one which is confined to the gallbladder, which has lymph nodes confined to the hepatoduodenal ligament, and the resectable adjacent organs, that means liver, omentum and colon, are involved. This is resectable, potentially curable gallbladder cancer. In between, the term now, like pancreas, what Dr. Hemant referred, but that there are some cases which are borderline resectable gallbladder cancer is also coming in, and the role of neoadjuvant treatment is being tested in that scenario. Before we open the abdomen in gallbladder cancer, this is what we say very loudly, both from SGPGI and my colleague Dr. Anil Agarwal from GB Pant Hospital. Every patient must have a staging laparoscopy. Every patient with gallbladder cancer, before a laparotomy is done, must have a staging laparoscopy, because these small surface deposits on the liver, on the omentum, on the peritoneum, which will not be picked up by any cross-sectional imaging, including PET scan, would invariably be present in a significant number of cases. You take it out, send it for frozen. If it is positive, please do not operate upon the patient. This patient is not going to survive whatever resection you might do for long. The standard operative procedure for gallbladder cancer, which is confined to gallbladder and to the hepatoduodenal ligament, is what is known as extended or radical cholecystectomy, which includes gallbladder with a wedge of liver in the segment 4 and 5, and lymph nodal clearance in the hepatoduodenal ligament behind the head and C loop of duodenum, and going along the common hepatic artery to the right of celiac axis. This is the standard minimum procedure. In some patients, we may have to do a formal 4B and 5 segment resection. In some patients with extensive liver involvement or the right portal pedicle involvement, we may have to do an extended right hepatectomy. In some patients where duodenum is involved, we may have to do a segmental or sleeve resection of duodenum. And as I said, colon and omentum obviously are resectable organs. Unfortunately, a large majority of patients with gallbladder cancer, even more than what is this with pancreatic cancer, are not resectable. And therefore, they need palliation. Palliation from jaundice, palliation from gastric outlet obstruction, which is because of the involvement of the first part of duodenum, and pain. And today, this palliation is all non-surgical. 1 or maybe 2 decades ago, we used to do surgical bypasses like segment 3 duct bypass or gastrojejunostomy. But today, with all the advances in therapeutic endoscopy and interventional radiology, palliation for gallbladder cancer is all non-surgical. And there is very little role for surgery in palliation of gallbladder cancer. So that, in summary, is the principle of management of gallbladder cancer. I think Ajay has framed some questions which, if time permits, we will take during the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It is always a real privilege to listen to your talk, always by Dr. Kapoor, sir. And we have these 2 new joinees in our institute, Dr. Vinay Kapoor, sir, and Dr. Saraswat. You'll be surprised, and maybe most of us know, that any World Congress on carcinoma gallbladder or a hepatology, hepatocellular carcinoma, cannot happen with either of these 2 not being in that conference on the dais. Any congress, any discussion on carcinoma gallbladder, anywhere in the world, Dr. Kapoor is invited to give his special aspect on that. And same thing with Dr. Saraswat. Anything on hepatology, anything on hepatocellular carcinoma, any discussion, whether it is in India, Turkey, US, Australia, he is always invited. He is always there as a speaker on that topic. Special comments from him always. Now, I would like to definitely introduce now Dr. Saraswat as well. Dr. Saraswat, sorry, वीडियो लगा सकते हैं? वीडियो जो था, Dr. Saraswat was a teacher in SGPGI when we were doing our MCH, and एक चीज होती थी, ललित इज हियर विद अस, जो मानेगा डर लगता था, और डर इसलिए लगता था कि ही वॉज अ परफेक्शनिस्ट, 100%. मतलब ऑलवेज व्हेन वी वुड प्रेजेंट, वो अभी इसमें मेरी स्लाइड में गलत निकाल देंगे, कॉमा कहां गलत लगा हुआ है. So he is that type of person who is 100% perfectionist, and it's a pleasure for us that he is here with us. Dr. Saraswat was trained in New Delhi at MAMC in 1979, and then subsequently he did his MD in medicine from All India Institute of Medical Sciences. He has also been trained abroad for liver transplantation at Queen Elizabeth Hospital. He has been a president of Indian Association of Surgical Gastroenterology, vice president Society of Gastrointestinal Endoscopy, founder member of Governing Council of South Asian Association of the, and honorary secretary of INASL, Indian Association of Study of Liver, member Governing Council of Indian Society of Gastroenterology. He is a member of Governing Council of INASL, member Governing Council of SGI, and definitely he has enormous number of papers in under his name. I think all the 3 speakers, if I remember, 200 से कम किसी के नहीं होंगे ना शायद मेरे अलावा. I am only on dais who has less number of publications. All of them have enormous number of publications in their name. I think I missed this part, Dr. Hemant Malhotra, which we'll use subsequently at the end about introducing him. I made this short video so as to introduce all of them. Now I invite Dr. Saraswat to please come on the dais and give a session. The topic allocated to him is again hepatocellular carcinoma. We have Dr. Nijavan here. I think Dr. Nijavan cannot be in the second seat. I think you have to, sir, please. Dr. Nijavan, sir, Professor Dr. Nijavan, sir, you have to be on the first seat with, sir, please. Professor Dr. Nijavan. And I think we have now quite a good number of gastroenterologists who have come in. Senior most gastroenterologist Dr. Nijavan sir and Dr. Anurag Govil sir. I will request Dr. Anurag Govil sir also to please come on the front seat. Sir, क्वेश्चंस तो आपने पूछने हैं ना सर को तो आंसर देना है, हमें तो खाली सुनना है, तो इसलिए प्लीज फर्स्ट सीट सर, आप फर्स्ट सीट वाले लोग हैं सर, आप पीछे. सो नाउ डॉक्टर सारस्वत सर प्लीज.
Thank you very much, Ajay. I have known Ajay as a very exuberant and a very active resident during his days at the SGPGI. And today I realize that he actually has a very good second career as a master of ceremonies, as an impresario, and as a presenter. I think that's been a revelation. At the outset, I'd like to thank Mahatma Gandhi University, Professor M.L. Swarnkar, and his team for giving me the opportunity to come to Jaipur and work with you here. And after 33 years at the SGPGI, it was the SGPGI connection that has brought me to Jaipur with Professor Vinay Kapoor, Ajay, Rajat, and quite a handful of alumni from SGPGI in gastroenterology being here. And of course, very leading and eminent gastroenterologists like Professor Nepalia, Dr. Govil, Sandeep, who's a very good and dear friend from our DM days at the All India Institute. So I really do not feel come out of the water or in an unfamiliar place. And I really look forward to spending good time and justifying all the words that have been said about me, which have been rather an overwhelming evening today evening. Now with these few words, I think in the next 10 minutes or so, I'll try and speak to you about the management of advanced hepatocellular carcinoma. As a word in background, in general, we have this feeling that the incidence and the frequency of hepatocellular carcinoma is increasing in India. Whether it is an actual increase or it's better because of better detection and awareness and more refined tools, that is not very clear. It is possibly due to hepatitis C virus is the leading cause for hepatocellular carcinoma in the northern and northwestern part of our country, while hepatitis B all over India, and the epidemic of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is contributing in a big way to cryptogenic cirrhosis and cancer in cryptogenic cirrhosis, may be the contributory factors for this apparent increase in HCC that we are witnessing. An unfortunate thing about this, as it is for many other cancers in our country, is that HCC generally tends to be detected at a very advanced state and at a late stage, and probably reflecting the absence of proper surveillance for this tumor in the population of cirrhotics, and also the need for better surveillance strategies than 6-monthly ultrasound and alpha-fetoprotein, which only pick up about 2 in 3 or about 60% of these tumors. Why also I thought it would be an important area to touch upon is that in the last couple of years, in what was considered to be a very non-salvageable group of patients, that is those with advanced hepatocellular carcinoma, various treatments and good management options have emerged, which would be I'll refer to in the later slides here. And very interestingly, I've been barely 2 weeks at the Mahatma Gandhi Medical College, and in this last 2 weeks, we have seen 4 patients with advanced hepatocellular carcinoma, which is more than what we used to see in 3 or 4 months at Lucknow. So for all these reasons, I thought we'd probably deal with this tumor. So a brief mention about one of these cases, a snippet of a case we saw. A 56-year-old lady, diabetic and hypertensive, knew she had been infected with hepatitis B for over 20 years, but without any monitoring, not undertaking any treatment. Somebody sometimes said कि इसका तो कोई इलाज होता नहीं है, and the patient left it at that. Presented with a very short duration of abdominal pain and no other features of significant liver disease. Her labs were fairly unremarkable except for some mild elevation in transaminases and that she was antigen positive. The imaging showed thrombosis in the main and the right branch of the portal vein. For the rest of it, the liver surface appeared normal. There was no other feature of significant or advanced chronic liver disease.
And a diagnosis of acute portal vein thrombosis was made, which is not uncommon in hepatitis B, particularly even with compensated cirrhosis, and the patient was begun on anticoagulants. However, when imaging was done, we picked up an attenuation area in the right lobe, initially thought to be a transient hepatic attenuation defect, but we suspected hepatocellular carcinoma, and there was also thrombosis of the portal vein along with the main branch in the main portal vein and a cavernoma formation. Alpha-fetoprotein gave away the story, it was very high. There were no varices. So a patient with compensated cirrhosis who had developed portal vein thrombosis, and because of the high AFP, the strong suspicion was that this was a tumoral portal vein thrombosis, possibly on a superimposed benign portal vein thrombosis, because a cavernoma is an unexpected finding in a malignant portal vein block. And when the whole body FDG PET was done, what we found was this very large infiltrative HCC in the right lobe. The portion of the right portal vein was FDG avid, while the rest of the thrombus in the portal vein was non-FDG avid. And we also picked up an adrenal metastatic deposit, showing us that we were dealing with an advanced hepatocellular carcinoma. And the management options in people with such extensive disease are very limited. Obviously, systemic therapy, there is no question of loco-regional ablative or surgical interventions, and systemic therapies in the form of multikinase or tyrosine kinase inhibitors, and of late immunotherapy. We heard Professor Swankar tell us about the interest in immunotherapy that is there at Mahatma Gandhi Institute, and this is a situation where this could be a very viable option for such patients. In a small number of patients, especially if there was no extrahepatic disease, one would have thought of using selective internal radiation therapy, or what used to be called TARE with yttrium-90, and particularly could be an option in this patient if the extrahepatic disease can be controlled with systemic therapy. So we chose the immunotherapy alternative, and this combination of atezolizumab and bevacizumab was started for this patient. The first course has been given and now the patient is on follow-up, was well tolerated by the patient. The other three patients I'll touch briefly. Post-SVR hepatitis C chronic cirrhosis, high alpha-fetoprotein with a large hepatocellular tumor, well-preserved liver function has been planned for and probably would have undergone. I think Dr. Nikhil will tell us that he has probably done a TARE for the patient today, and we'll be closely following, expecting a good response in this patient. Another patient presented with what has something that I've seen only a couple of times earlier at SGPGI, a large hepatocellular cancer with a very high alpha-fetoprotein levels in a non-cirrhotic liver that has presented with a spontaneous rupture of the hepatoma, with a hematoma, which I think Dr. Ajay operated on this patient and found a large hematoma. Between diagnosis and surgery, the tumor had already ruptured, and we have managed this patient with TACE and is planned for lenvatinib therapy, and another patient who is being evaluated. So in a very brief span of barely 2 weeks, we have come across these very interesting patients and problems. And with this background, I'll talk to you briefly about the current status of systemic therapy for advanced hepatocellular carcinoma. All of you in this audience would be familiar with this Barcelona Clinic liver cancer staging system, which basically looks at the status of the tumor, status of the liver, and status of the patient in determining the prognostic stage. As you will see at very early stages, there are a lot of intervention options possible. Ablative therapy, resection, transplant, all of these options are possible. But for intermediate, advanced, and terminal stages, the options are much more limited. For intermediate stage, that is unresectable patients but with preserved liver function, chemoembolization or other ablative therapies, DEB-TACE, C-TACE, or TARE or CERT are options that are available. While advanced HCC, which we'll be talking about, refers to patients who have unresectable disease because of either portal vein invasion, as we saw, or the presence of extrahepatic spread, but with a well-preserved liver function. So they are then able to tolerate therapies, and for these patients, systemic therapies remain the major option. And as you will see in the outcomes, while early stages, survival is more than 5 years, for intermediate stage maybe 2.5 years. But with Disseminated disease survival is less than 2 months, and the terminal stage when the liver failure is developed, none of these ablative or surgical options are an option other than best supportive care. So now the approved systemic therapies that can be tried out are these tyrosine kinase or multikinase inhibitors or the immune checkpoint inhibitors, which I have briefly summarized here. Tyrosine kinase inhibitors, first line drugs are sorafenib and lenvatinib, and for the first 10 years after sorafenib came up, almost 8, 9, 10 years, there were multiple failed phase 3 trials and no new molecule emerged on the scene, and we had to be satisfied with the use of sorafenib. In the last 2 or 3 years, a large number of molecules have emerged, including lenvatinib, second line therapy, regorafenib and cabozantinib, and immune checkpoint inhibitors, which have been widely used in liver as they have been used in many other fields of oncology, anti-PD-L1, these 3 agents, nivolumab, pembrolizumab and atezolizumab, and anti-CTLA4 and agents as well as anti-angiogenic factors. And this slide shows you the various pivotal trials which have provided evidence for the use of these drugs and have led to licensing by FDA and global authorization agencies as well as in India. And of these, the combination therapy with immune checkpoint inhibitors and anti-angiogenic agents is one that is attracting a lot of attention. The combinations that are available can be either 2 immune checkpoint inhibitors or tyrosine kinase inhibitors with immune checkpoint inhibitors. And of these, atezolizumab and bevacizumab, which is the IMbrave study, has provided data that led to the licensing of this. Study came out in 2020, and the result of this study led to immediate licensing as a first-line agent for HCC systemic therapy. The other combinations that have also been tried are shown here, nivolumab and ipilimumab, and sintilimab as well as bevacizumab biosimilars. So I'll only be talking briefly about the atezoli-bev combination which came out in the NEJM 2020. This was a phase 3 randomized trial focusing on patients with locally advanced or metastatic or unresectable HCC, and a total of over 500 patients were included, with primary endpoints being the standard endpoints that we saw in the pancreas trials, overall as well as progression-free survival and the objective response rates. And as you can see with this graph, the atezoli-bev combination has not only better overall survival but also has disease-free or progression-free survival is significantly better than the comparator arm, that is with the standard of care sorafenib. As far as the secondary endpoints are concerned, the confirmed objective response rate at 27.3 for this combination is the highest reported for any systemic therapy combination in phase 3 trials, compared to about 12% for sorafenib. Similarly, disease control rates and ongoing objective response rates are significantly higher with this combination. Adverse events are something that are similar to what was seen with sorafenib, except that because of the use of VEGFR inhibitors, the risk of GI hemorrhage, variceal hemorrhage, even subarachnoid hemorrhage was a bit higher, and that has to be borne in mind while screening patients for the atezo-bev combination. Additionally, an delay in the time to deterioration of patient-reported quality of life was significantly longer with the atezo-bev combination than with sorafenib. So, showing that in every aspect, this combination has proved better than the standard of care. And the main key point that emerges is that it has now become the new benchmark as first-line therapy for unresectable or advanced HCC in patients with good liver function. These people should be screened with endoscopy for any potential bleeding site in the upper GI tract, because bleeding has been noted as a complication specifically for this therapy. And those who are not eligible for atezo-bev, lenvatinib and sorafenib continue to be alternative first-line therapies. Now, second-line therapies that have been studied have also emerged in the last couple of years, and anti-angiogenic therapies have received US FDA approval. Many of these molecules are available in our country, and the combination of checkpoint inhibitors with the PKI inhibitors, I'll briefly talk to you summarize them, second-line therapies in this combination. That is, those in whom disease has progressed on sorafenib or who have not tolerated sorafenib can be offered these agents where ramucirumab has met its primary and secondary endpoints of better overall survival and progression-free survival. Pembrolizumab also has shown better survival. While this combination, second-line combination, 3 arms were used, and one of them, it was excellent, 22.7-month median overall survival in these very advanced disease patients, while nivolumab alone did not really score over sorafenib. The serious adverse events that have been noted with this range of drugs that have been used for advanced or systemic therapy for HCC has primarily been the hand-foot syndrome, diarrhea, hypertension. Particularly with the immune checkpoint inhibitors, immune checkpoint-induced hepatitis is a major concern because they step up your immune response, and an autoimmune like hepatitis has been reported, which needs to be borne in mind and looked out for when patients are started on this therapy. Bleeding I've already mentioned. In addition to these, there are more combinations available in the pipeline, which studies are going on, and we expect these results soon. Again, various combinations of immune checkpoint inhibitors and anti-angiogenic or 2 immune checkpoint inhibitors, the LEAP, CheckMate, the COSMIC and the Himalaya trials as they have been shown. And these promise to offer better options for systemic therapy for advanced hepatocellular carcinoma. So to summarize, the treatment algorithm, first-line therapy today for systemic therapy in those with good liver function would be a combination of atezolizumab and bevacizumab, while second line for those where this combination is contraindicated remains sorafenib or lenvatinib, and multiple and second line therapies as shown here are now available for this subgroup of patients also. So today the treatment strategy for HCC in 2020 has changed, not so much for the early and intermediate as has changed for advanced stage cancers, with first line systemic therapies, second line as well as third line agents available. And the outcome is that in the pivotal trials for the first line therapy, median overall survival was not reached. It was longer than the duration of the study and in the limited stage, so showing you that the very good outcome that these first line therapies have, while it has improved from a less than 10-month expectation to about 13 to 15 months in second line and about 8 to 12 months in the third line therapies. So ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I would say that after nearly a decade, we have had about 5 positive phase 3 studies of new drugs in HCC that improve overall survival. Of this, the atezolizumab and bevacizumab combination is a first-line, highly active combination which is superior to sorafenib, and while lenvatinib remains a good first-line option and is better tolerated than sorafenib. Level 1 evidence is yet awaited for single immune checkpoint inhibitors, a combination of immune checkpoint inhibitors with a second TKI or with 2 immune checkpoint inhibitors has been found to be effective. And so the outlook in advanced HCC with good liver function is no longer as dismal as it was, and the prospects look bright. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for a very nice elaborative talk on HCC. And as always, since the time of our MCS days, वो अधिकतर bouncers थे. So it was very difficult to understand some of the topics, and they were very difficult, and definitely it's a science which is developing day by day. I request, please, can you arrange 3 chairs for our 3 speakers so that we can have a discussion, brief discussion. So we'll not take much time between the discussion and the drinks and the dinner. Just a brief discussion on any topics, if any points that you have raised, you have in minds. मेरे को याद आता है डॉक्टर कपूर when he was joining, he asked राजस्थान में कितना gallbladder cancer होता है, and you'll not believe on day 1 when he entered the chamber after his joining, first patient waiting for him was a carcinoma gallbladder. Same thing Dr. Saraswat asked when he had visited, यहाँ पे HCC कितना होता है, and first week he had 3 HCC. So हमारे राजस्थान में we have the same number of patients or even more than what we have at Lucknow or at Delhi. So the incidence is quite high, and we are fortunate that at Mahatma Gandhi we have quite good number of patients. So I request all the 3 speakers, please come on the dais. Dr. Hemant Malhotra sir, Dr. Vinay Kapoor and Dr. Saraswat. Please come on the dais. And if we can have any questions, you are most welcome to ask the question. Can we have a mic to answer the questions? Can we have an extra mic? Yes. Yeah, one more mic. Any questions from your side, or okay, should I start the ball rolling? If you have, it's fine. So in the meantime, sir, let me start with carcinoma gallbladder. Sir, carcinoma gallbladder detected preoperatively with a single lesion in liver. Single lesion, carcinoma gallbladder, segment 6. What is your surgical planning? What is oncologist planning? Do you believe in same, or you differ in your opinion?
So as I tried to emphasize earlier, carcinoma gallbladder is a very aggressive malignancy. In the US, they consider pancreas to be the worst cancer. But after having seen both, I can say with confidence that gallbladder is even worse than pancreas. So if there is any metastasis, a lot of students ask this and a lot of surgeons ask this, that suppose the metastasis is small, single, in the area of liver, which anyway we are going to resect, why not resect it? Yes, technically it is resectable, but from prognosis point of view, it is not. So any metastasis anywhere in gallbladder cancer, as of today, is a contraindication for resection.
Dr. Hemant Malhotra, sir, do you feel the same, or you feel we should resect and then send you the patient?
So I think I 100% agree with Dr. Kapoor. Such a patient, and unfortunately, they are quite common. They're not unusual at all. They should be discussed in a multidisciplinary way, and if resection is possible, if the general condition of the patient permits, then it should be attempted. Otherwise, again, if the GC permits, we can put them on palliative chemotherapy, but the outcomes are not good.
So we have a multidisciplinary approach, and we have a multidisciplinary team which we have oncologist, oncosurgeon, a GI surgeon and a gastroenterologist on the same platform and discussing almost all the cases which are of this grievance. So now my next question would be for carcinoma pancreas. I think that is a common topic to all the three of you. A patient with carcinoma pancreas having a portal vein infiltration versus a portal vein invasion. Do you think that this patient should undergo Whipple's and then come to you for chemo? He should undergo chemo and then come to you. And same thing, for at the same time, a patient having a bilirubin of 25 with jaundice, with cholangitis, without cholangitis. What is your opinion?
So portal vein involvement in carcinoma pancreas, there are differences of opinion because there are many definitions of what today we call borderline resectable pancreatic cancer. So some definitions say that portal vein involvement alone is not a contraindication for resection. You can go for upfront resection, including portal vein resection and reconstruction, whereas other definitions say that you should give neoadjuvant treatment, considering it to be borderline resectable pancreatic cancer, and then resect. So different guidelines propose differently. But one must differentiate between portal vein involvement and the arterial involvement. If it is SMA or celiac axis, then anything more than 180 is unresectable, and anything less than 180 is borderline resectable, which is then a candidate for neoadjuvant treatment.
Dr. Hemant Malhotra, sir, will you like?
So in a situation like this, I would 100% do what my surgical oncologist or my gastrosurgeon would say. I would send the patient to Dr. Kapoor or Dr. Ajay. If they feel that, okay, we can operate, please go ahead and operate. And if they feel that there'll be problems in surgery, do something, reduce the disease, and we would give neoadjuvant chemo. So the surgeon is the driving force for me in a borderline situation like this.
Okay. Now for Dr. Saraswat, sir. Okay, Dr. Kapoor wants to add something.
One more thing I would like to add about neoadjuvant treatment. In many cancers, especially the more aggressive ones like pancreas and gallbladder, after having seen the role of neoadjuvant treatment, I have personally come to believe that it is a very good modality to test the biology of the disease. A patient who is doubtfully resectable, once you give neoadjuvant treatment, if the disease doesn't respond or if it increases, this patient is not a candidate for resection, because in spite of resection, this patient is not going to do well. So neoadjuvant treatment, my philosophy is, gives me an opportunity and time to see the behavior of the disease, while at the same time we are doing some treatment for the disease.
Okay, now two questions for Dr. Saraswat sir specifically. One is patient having a bilirubin of 25 with cholangitis, without cholangitis for periampullary carcinoma or a hedopancreas mass.
I think with cholangitis is a no-brainer. Anybody, no surgeon worth his salt will ever touch a patient with cholangitis. So to control cholangitis, you need preoperative biliary drainage. Now, the role of preoperative biliary drainage in a person with deep jaundice and without cholangitis is something that has been debated, but in practice, I find most surgeons not very comfortable with operating upon patients with the serum bilirubin much higher than say 10 mg% or so, even in the absence of cholangitis, although I think on that the opinions could be taken. And the available evidence of preoperative biliary drainage has, unfortunately, the way the trials have been devised and done, particularly for lower end block, have failed to show any benefit of preoperative biliary drainage. But then specific subsets and the design and choice of patients has limited the applicability in real life of many of these of this data.
Okay, last few words about hepatocellular carcinoma, the topic, and role of transplant in HCC. Do you think that?
I think the role of transplantation in HCC, one is in patients who have disease that is confined to the liver and have underlying disease that is cirrhosis, that is progressive and that could be cured, but without any extrahepatic spread. So for early disease as well as intermediate level disease, there is a clear place. And unless in people who have very advanced liver failure, there is extrahepatic disease, one could even consider transplant for people with decompensation. So in selected, very carefully selected and chosen patients. And maybe for this category, maybe Vinay would have to, anything you'd like to add for transplant?
I mean, in the West, where most of the transplant is deceased donor, we have these criteria, Milan, UCSF, and then the Toronto criteria, which are increasing, and the metro ticket criteria. But the two leading transplant surgeons in India, Dr. Sain and Dr. Subhash, they have a different philosophy. They say that if there is no extrahepatic, because that of course is the bottom line, that there has to be no extrahepatic disease, and that is why these patients will have a PET scan. They feel that if there is a donor available, then it becomes a donor specific kind of procedure. That's a very debatable ethical and otherwise issue, but they have done transplants even for large HCCs, which are beyond all known criteria, but obviously with no extrahepatic disease.
So I think considering the extremely dismal outcomes with other options, like if you label the patient as palliative chemotherapy or immunotherapy or whatever, the outcomes are really, really dismal. So if transplant can be done, it should be done. And the only patients of HCC I have seen cured or having a prolonged survival are patients who had a transplant.
So that's a very important message today, that HCC, advanced disease also, if it is limited to liver, we can have transplant as a viable option. And before we conclude this session, I would request Colonel Chaubey sir to please come on the dais and just give a vote of thanks and thanks to all the speakers, and so as to just limit our session today. Colonel Chaubey, please. मैं हमेशा सर को कर्नल बोलता हूँ, सर की पोस्ट कुछ ज़्यादा है. सर मेरे को प्लीज, हमारे को आर्मी में इतना ही पता है होता है कि सर हमारे को बहुत सारी पोस्ट के बारे में पता नहीं होता. So Chaubey sir.
Chairman Emeritus, Mahatma Gandhi University of Medical Sciences, and dignitaries, colleagues and my friends. With these three talks, the academic session comes to an end. And as you heard from my friend, Dr. Ajay Sharma, about the concept of private medical education in India and then in Rajasthan. And it's all because of the vision of Professor M.L. Swarnkar, who thought then in late 90s and early 21st century when this medical college came up. And today it is one of the best private medical colleges. I know for sure this because for 4 years I was heading one of the medical institutions, which I was one of the instrument in setting up in a very remote corner of the country in Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And I know it's very, very difficult thing. And today this MG University has, as Ajay told, the now 250 MBBS students, which is the highest number of students the National Medical Council, hitherto called MCI, permits. It has postgraduates, as Ajay told, that it had more postgraduates so far than the undergraduate seats. Now, of course, with the addition of 100 seats, the MBBS seats will be more. But if you add post-graduation and super specialty, then probably will be, again, the specialized seats will be more than the MBBS. And all is because of the vision and the perseverance and hard work of Professor M.L. Swarnkar and his team. The leader is chosen by his acumen to judge his colleagues and develop a team. And needless to say, Professor M.L. Swarnkar has done wonders in developing the team which MGU is so proud of. So I'm very thankful to Professor Swarnkar and all his team members, senior colleagues sitting in front row, and I am also thankful to all the dignitaries, speakers in particular, Professor Malhotra, Professor Saraswat, Professor V.K. Kapoor. I knew Professor Kapoor and Professor Saraswat from earlier days. Dr. Malhotra, I met him here. I have some experience of working in Lucknow. I am a graduate from that college. Those days, of course, cancer management, surgical management was a rarity, and that also carcinoma gallbladder. But here, this institution is doing wonders for medical education. And so with this, I thank everybody and all the audience for